the news tonight, His Majesty the King meets in Abu Dhabi with top UAE officials en route to a state visit to China and later to New York, where he will address the UN General Assembly on regional challenges. Britain, France and Germany welcome a framework agreed between the United States and Russia to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons, averting the immediate threat of US military action against Damascus. And the worst floods in decades in the U.S. state of Colorado leave 4 people dead and over 170 unaccounted for as rescue workers battle to reach cut-off residents. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King met in Abu Dhabi with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of the UAE Armed Forces. The meeting dealt with bilateral ties as well as Arab and regional issues. The two sides voiced appreciation of the level of relations between their two countries and agreed on the need to further advance cooperation in all fields. Receiving His Majesty on arrival in Abu Dhabi was the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi as well as top UAE officials. His Majesty made the stop in Abu Dhabi on his way to Beijing for a state visit at the invitation of China's new leadership. His Majesty will hold talks with President Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders on ways to cement Sino-Jordanian ties and will discuss a range of regional and international issues. After Beijing, the King will travel to New York, where he will deliver a keynote address at the United Nations General Assembly about Jordan's position on Mideast developments, including the Syria crisis and Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations. His Majesty will also meet with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and heads of state attending the General Assembly. His Majesty's trip is part of ongoing consultations with world capitals about regional developments, namely the situation in Syria and efforts to reach a peace deal between Palestinians and Israelis. His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Al Hussein was sworn in as regent. And over to the Syria crisis, U.S. President Barack Obama touted the possibility for a diplomatic solution in Syria, saying it may come about partially because of the credible threat of U.S. military force. In his weekly radio address, Obama said there are indications of progress in Syria's willingness to abide by an international agreement that prohibits the use of chemical weapons, but concrete actions to demonstrate its seriousness are needed.
The agreement needs to verify that the Assad regime and Russia are keeping their commitments. That means working to turn Syria's chemical weapons over to international control and ultimately destroying them. This would allow us to achieve our goal, deterring the Syrian regime from using chemical weapons, degrading their ability to use them, and making it clear to the world that we won't tolerate their use.
However, Obama has not removed the threat of force from the table over concerns that the negotiations to destroy Syria's chemical weapons are successful and are not a stalling topic.
But we are not just going to take Russia and Assad's word for it. We need to see concrete actions to demonstrate that Assad is serious about giving up his chemical weapons. And since this plan emerged only with a credible threat of U.S. military action, we will maintain our military posture in the region to keep the pressure on the Assad regime. And if diplomacy fails, the United States and the international community must remain prepared to act.
Shortly after Obama's address, the U.S. and Russian foreign ministers announced in Geneva they have agreed a framework for elimination of Syria's chemical weapons, averting the possibility of any immediate U.S. military action against the country. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who negotiated the agreement, also said they want the weapons to be destroyed outside Syria if possible. They gave Damascus 1 week to submit a comprehensive listing including names, types and quantities of its chemical weapons and other information on research and development facilities.
After nearly 3 days of negotiations and compromises, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced a joint framework for removing Syria's chemical weapons. Kerry said if President Bashar al-Assad upheld his end of the deal, which includes full and immediate access to the chemical weapons sites, then the plan could work. But Kerry stopped short of saying the threat of military action had been completely removed.
Now, the potential of a threat of force is clearly one of those options that may or may not be available to the Security Council and is subject to debate. Everybody knows the differences of opinion about it. But depending on what Assad does, that possibility exists either within the process of the United Nations or, as it did here, with a decision by the President of the United States and like-minded allies if they thought that was what it came to.
Kerry said under the 6-part plan, Syria must submit a comprehensive listing of its chemical weapons stockpiles within 1 week. Lavrov noted that the UN body on chemical weapons would first approve the plan before a timetable was set. Kerry plans to travel to Jerusalem Sunday for talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and will meet with British and French officials in Paris on Monday to discuss Syria.
British Foreign Secretary William Hague welcomed the deal between Russia and the United States and said urgent work would now take place to implement the plan to destroy Syria's chemical weapons. France also welcomed the deal between Russia and the United States, saying it's an important step forward. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said in a statement shortly after the deal was reached that talks on Monday in Paris would focus on the implementation of the plan. EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton welcomed the deal and offered the European Union's assistance in the inspection process of Syria's chemical sites. And in Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel said the deal brought a ray of hope.
Damit hat eine politische Lösung.
Now, action must follow words. We will monitor developments in the following days. But it is good news that the United States of America and Russia have joined a political path. It is good news for all of us, and the European Union has supported this political process. Therefore, I'm very glad to see a bit of hope.
But not everybody was happy about the U.S.-Russian deal. The Syrian opposition are saying the U.S.-Russian agreement to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons is a blow to the 2.5-year uprising. Head of the Syrian Supreme Military Council, General Slim Idris, said in Istanbul the deal will allow the Syrian president to escape being held accountable for the killing of hundreds of civilians. Assad continues to deny responsibility for the gas attack in a Damascus suburb last month. Asked if rebel brigades would facilitate the work of United Nations weapons inspectors, Idris said although it would be very complicated, the rebels will facilitate the mission. And also in Turkey, the Syrian National Coalition announced the election of moderate Islamist Ahmed Tohme as provisional prime minister. The coalition hopes that 48-year-old Tohme, a former political prisoner from the province of Deir ez-Zor, will boost the opposition's credibility. And on the ground in Syria, there were reports today of Syrian government strikes on rebel-held suburbs of the capital. Syrian warplanes struck rebel-held areas around Damascus, while troops clashed with insurgents on the front lines. Activists said the strikes were focused on Birze, a northeastern part of central Damascus, where rebels have been on the offensive to push further into the city. Also today, Syrian television reported that government forces have regained control of several parts of the ancient Christian town of Ma'lula. The broadcast showed tanks inside the town and in the main square. Ma'lula has several churches and important monasteries, as well as the Greek Orthodox nunnery Martekla, visited by many Christians and Muslims who are drawn by its reputation as a holy place where the sick would be miraculously healed. Last Sunday, Al-Qaeda-linked Jabhat al-Nusra fighters entered the convent, and the next day, Syrian government forces launched an offensive to wrest back control following 6 days of fighting. Ma'lula is host to the oldest Christian community in the world and is considered a symbol of the Christian presence in Syria. And over to Iraq, and in the continued surge of violence, a suicide bomber killed at least 21 people at a funeral in the northern governorate of Nineveh. It was not immediately clear who was behind the attack. According to the United Nations, about 800 Iraqis were killed in acts of violence last month. Yesterday, 2 roadside bombs killed 30 people outside a mosque in the Baquba, just as worshippers were leaving following Friday prayers. 25 people were also wounded in the Baquba explosions, which occurred about 10 minutes apart. Over to Egypt, and the trial of former President Hosni Mubarak and the former Minister of Interior Habib al-Adli resumed at a Cairo court today. Presiding Judge Mahmoud Kamel al-Rashidi called on the former chief of Egypt's intelligence to testify in the case. A lawyer for the defense of al-Adli said the witnesses called to testify had information regarding the events leading to the killing of protesters during the 2011 revolution. Rashidi also announced that the upcoming trials, where many current and former security and governmental officials will be called in to deliver testimonies, will not be broadcast live on Egyptian television stations. He said his decision was based on the need to safeguard national security. The trial was adjourned until next month. Over to the U.S. and in Colorado, rescue workers are still battling to reach residents cut off by the worst floods in decades. So far, heavy rains and flooding have killed at least 4 people and left over 170 still unaccounted for. Flash floods triggered by unusually heavy late summer storms have toppled buildings, washed out roads, and inundated farmland. The flash floods soaked Colorado's biggest urban centers, from Fort Collins near the Wyoming border south through Boulder, Denver, and Colorado Springs. The National Weather Service in Boulder warned of scattered showers and thunderstorms later today and tomorrow that could trigger further flash flooding in the already drenched area. Japan's first new rocket in 12 years successfully lifted off today after 2 setbacks last month, keeping alive hopes that the country may be able to enter the growing multi-billion-dollar satellite launch industry. The rocket is carrying a telescope for observation of the solar system from space. U.S. companies had a monopoly on the commercial launch business 30 years ago, but their hold has steadily declined, with most of the business going to the France-based Arianespace, a public-private European partnership that last year reported revenue of 1.3 billion euros. Russia also markets a variety of rockets for space launches, while India and China also provide launch services to some extent. Looking for a house? Then get your checkbooks ready and head to Florida, as the lavish Miami Beach mansion, once owned by legendary Italian fashion designer Gianni Versace, is up for grabs. The mansion will be sold at an auction on Tuesday, with bids starting at $25 million. Built in 1930, the more than 2,000 square meter mansion on Ocean Drive features 10 bedrooms, 11 bathrooms, and a 16 meters mosaic pool lined with 24-karat gold. Many of the property's rooms are adorned with hand-painted frescoes, Italian marble, and stained glass. Versace bought the mansion in 1992, and 5 years later, the designer was shot dead on the doorstep of the house. We stay in the world of glamour, and the second day of the London Fashion Week, Scottish designer Holly Fulton stepped back in time to the 1970s as she showcased her Spring-Summer 2014 collection. The show opened with a sea of blue denim dresses embellished with Fulton's signature Art Deco motif. Unexpected combinations of sugary lilac powder pinks, flashes of faded neon, and warm grays played out across matching bags and accessories. Fulton's designs are not just available to the fashion elite, as the designer has just launched an exclusive capsule collection where the price range is easily affordable to working women. We begin with tennis and the Davis Cup that saw the Czech Republic clinch an unassailable lead in the tournament's semi-final. Thomas Berdych and Radek Stepanek breezed past Argentina's Carlos Berlocq and Horacio Zeballos in 3 sets. They won 6-3, 6-4, 6-2 in 2 hours and 3 minutes to earn an unbeatable 3-love lead. The Czechs, who won last year's trophy by beating Spain, will travel to either Canada or Serbia for the November final. Frenchman Kenny Elsonde won the 142.2-kilometer penultimate stage of the Tour of Spain, with American Chris Horner finishing second and tightening his grip on overall victory. Horner dropped his most persistent rival Vincenzo Nibali of Italy with a little over 1 kilometer to go to the race's final summit finish. Spain's Alejandro Valverde was third. With one easy 109.6-kilometer stage remaining tomorrow, Horner looks all but certain to win the race outright. And finally, moderate weather prevails in most regions tonight, with northwesterly light to moderate winds. A heat wave that affected the kingdom over the past few days will taper off tomorrow, when normal summer conditions prevail in the highlands, but it continues to be relatively hot in other regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively hot conditions with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King meets in Abu Dhabi with top UAE officials en route to a state visit to China and later to New York, where he will address the UN General Assembly on regional challenges. Britain, France and Germany welcome a framework agreed between the United States and Russia to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons, averting the immediate threat of US military action against Damascus. And the worst floods in decades in the U.S. state of Colorado leave 4 people dead and over 170 unaccounted for as rescue workers battle to reach cut-off residents. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alita Khan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.